Right. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. It is wonderful to see you again. We've got a lot of people who attended Open Education Week previously, and it's lovely to see everyone again. For those who don't know me, my name is Mace Fatai. I'm the program lead for the UTS Open Education Week and manager of learning experience design at UTS. It is a pleasure to be here with you today, and I have the honor of chairing this session. We have an exciting program ahead of us, filled with insightful discussions and inspiring ideas about the power of open education. Thank you for joining us, and I look forward to engaging in thought-provoking sessions. I would like to start with acknowledging the country I'm joining from today. On behalf of the organizing team, I would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, upon whose ancestral lands our campuses now stand. I would like to pay respect to the elders, both past and present, acknowledging them as the traditional custodians of knowledge for these lands. I would like also to remind you that decolonization that happened in history in North America and Australia is still happening to date. Yet the lesson is not being learned. The colonization of the land, the olive tree, and the words that we speak is still going on in Palestine. I would like to invite you as well to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which you live and work in the chat, if you like. Just a quick housekeeping. We'll be recording, as you can see, in this session and making it available under Creative Commons license after the event. So if you prefer not to appear in the recording, please keep your camera off while asking questions. Captioning and transcript are enabled, so you'll be able to use them during the session. I would like now to invite the head of learning design team, Sebastian Krug, to officially open UTS Open Education Week. Over to you, Sebastian.
Thank you, Mace. Thanks, everyone. And I too would like to extend my acknowledgement to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation here in present-day Sydney, and pay my respects to any Indigenous people joining us today. It's a beautiful day here in Sydney. The sun is shining, the harbour is glistening, and so we're very fortunate to be connecting with and on this land. Especially as Mace correctly pointed out, colonization and dispossession is something that is still indeed happening in our time. It is a difficult and chaotic time in the world. It's almost like we're reaching a boiling point where the entire economic system and the system of nation states that upholds it is facing a crisis. And I know that this might seem like a tangent, but I do feel that as the head of learning design here at UTS, addressing an international community of open education practitioners and enthusiasts, this reality cannot be ignored. The issue of open education, as I see it, its insistence on openness rather than closedness, its insistence on access for anyone as opposed to access for those who pay, and the vision that we all have for a genuinely global community of collected and connected intelligence, all these principles are under attack. Tariffs, visa, blacklists. I went to a conference last week and there was talk about zero trust cyber frameworks, not to mention the attacks on science. All of these reactionary things are working against the vision that so many people who are here today are fighting for. And so what we really want to see is an open and inclusive world with education and knowledge accessible to all. So events like these, where proponents of open education continue to organize and connect and build relationships and share practices, all of these things are especially important at this time. And I'm optimistic and also convinced that this messy time, that boiling point I was talking about, will eventually bring us over to a new period, a higher stage society, where all those contradictions of intellectual property and closed national borders, war, all of those things have been resolved, and that the future is open. And I'm not saying that I think it will happen without struggle. I think workers, young people, professionals everywhere in the world, they want openness. They share the vision for open education, open borders, access for everyone. So with that roundabout note of optimism, and within the global context, it is my absolute pleasure to formally open OE Week and to salute all of you here who are fighting, if I may say so, wherever you are, to continue to develop open educational practices, to build and share open educational resources, and to not let anything stop you. And thank you all very much for your time and for being here. And thank you, Mace. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. Yes, the colonization is still happening. It's still in our curricula. And today we hope to connect and share, but also we hope that we can take away things from our keynote speaker, who will be introducing in a few minutes to you on how to liberate our curriculum. I would like also to recognize my team who've been working tirelessly to organize the Open Education Week. Got Jenny Wallace, who's here with me in the room, David Yates, who will be facilitating today, and Scott Bradshaw. And we also have with us our very special friend and partner in Open Education, Helen Chan, who will be also facilitating today in the background. So it is my pleasure to welcome you all again to today's session. We are exploring the power of where we explore the power of open education in fostering inclusive and global learning. Open education plays a crucial role in curriculum internationalization and decolonization, ensuring that diverse perspectives and epistemologies are meaningfully integrated into learning materials. To deepen our understanding in this important topic, I'm delighted to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Sarita Jangiani from the University of British Columbia. Dr. Jangiani is a passionate advocate for open education and its role in creating equitable and accessible learning experiences. Her work focuses on challenging traditional structure in education, promoting diversity in knowledge creation, and empowering learners and educators alike. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jangiani as she shares with us as she shares with her insights with us today. But before handing over to Sarita, please allow me to introduce Sarita's work a little bit more formally. Sarita is an interim associate dean, equity, and provides strategic leadership to advance the faculty's equity priorities, fostering transformative teaching, innovative learning, and leading-edge research which is guided by high scholarship collaboration, equity, and inclusion standards. Dr. Jangiani is the David Liam Chair in Multicultural Education, providing support to increase interest, programming, and engagement in multicultural and anti-racist education, and to assist schools to foster critical multiculturalism. She has received 2 Open Educational Resources Champion Awards from the University of British Columbia and was recognized as the Faculty of Education 2023 Universal Design for Learning Fellow. She's currently involved in projects related to open pedagogy, alternative grading, and belonging in learning and teaching. Welcome, Sarita, and I'll stop sharing my screen now so you can share, and over to you.
Thank you so much for that lovely welcome. I'm just getting my screen up and ready. Can you see is my title slide up there?
Yes, yes, we can
Great.
see.
So again, thank you so much. It's an honor to be with you. I know we're all on different time zones. It's late evening here. I want to take a moment to thank Mace Fetcher for inviting me in the Open education team as well for hosting me virtually at UTS to be a part of this event. I just also want to take a moment. I really appreciate your welcome to land and the acknowledgement. And I want to share that today I'm coming to you from UBC. I work at UBC's Point Grey campus in Vancouver, which is located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. The land it is situated on has always been a place of learning for Musqueam people who for millennia have passed on their culture, history, and traditions from one generation to another. I'd also like to take a moment and just share this little excerpt that I took from the University of Victoria for their Center for Youth and Society, just talking about when we're thinking about decolonizing and what that work involves. And I thought as we're thinking about decolonizing and indigeneity, or talking about the land acknowledgement, a few of these points really resonated. And so when we're thinking about curricula, to really think about whose knowledge and ways of knowing are given priority. When we're thinking about decolonizing education, that it's rooted in connection to place, and that part of the process of decolonizing education is reestablishing links to community, which I think are so important. And I just really wanted to further emphasize that, and I'll talk about that later in my talk as well. So today I'm going to be talking about open educational practices, and that it goes beyond just using open educational resources. They include collaborative pedagogies, co-creation of knowledge, and inclusive teaching approaches that can challenge traditional, often Eurocentric educational paradigms. And with that, I will speak to how open educational practices can support inclusive, diverse, and globally relevant curricula. So I want to start off by sharing a bit about my own journey to open education. So I first learned about open educational resources when I was teaching, and textbook affordability was an issue for many of my students. From there, I started to learn more about open educational practices. And I have two definitions here, and I'm going to share the second one with you, which can be defined as teaching and learning practices and environments that promote equity, collaboration, and innovation, and invite students to create and share knowledge with future publics, often in association with the use of open educational resources. And what I love about this particular definition is that focus on environments that promote equity, that collaborative spirit. And so returning back to my story, so the institution I was working at then embarked on a series of workshops on decolonizing the syllabus. And I started to reflect further on the courses I teach and the assignments, and how I could be more intentional about the readings, the topics, to create a more inclusive course that recognizes diverse perspectives and knowledges. I really wanted to explore how open educational practices could be leveraged to create transformative change. And so I want to take a moment to highlight this article by Mahabali and colleagues, which is, I think, a great entry point, framing open educational practices from a social justice perspective, highlights the importance of open educational practices to advance social justice in education. And what I love about this article is that it stresses the need to critically assess and intentionally design these practices, hopefully in community, to mitigate further harm. I find sometimes I think there's this assumption that if you're using OERs, you are addressing social justice, but there's more to it. There's a lot of intentionality. So just want to highlight this article for a moment. And so as I was mentioning, I was in the middle of redesigning a course, and I thought we'd done a good job. I'd worked closely with a team. We restructured the assignments to give students more agency, diversified the readings, and I felt optimistic about the inclusive environment we were trying to create. I thought we were on the right track. And then one day I heard a student say, "I don't really feel like I belong." I felt a little crushed. It stopped me. And it left a deep impact on me that stayed with me. And I want to say over the long run in a positive way, as it's a reminder of what I aspire to work towards. And as I further unpack this, I realized that despite all the changes we'd made, some of the students still didn't see themselves reflected in the course, especially in the content. And that realization hit me hard. I like to think that I work at fostering spaces where I hope learners feel seen and valued, and hearing that made me question my assumptions, my approach. It also added that critical lens. And so it was a turning point. I began exploring culturally responsive practices, wondering if this might help bridge the gap. I reflected on what it means to belong. What do we mean by inclusion and for whom? Culturally responsive practices, in part, held a potential for not just for inclusion, but for transformation. And that journey led me to consider curriculum internationalization. So that's a process of integrating global, international, and intercultural perspectives into the curriculum in terms of content, pedagogical approaches, and learning outcome. The aim of helping professionals and global citizens. And so I started to reflect on this. And then I was thinking about, okay, open educational practices in relation to curriculum internationalization. And in particular, how OEPs offer a response to this challenge of internationalization and decolonization of the curriculum. So open educational practices, it's a lot about cross collaboration, breaking down traditional boundaries, geographic, institutional, epistemological, by enabling collaborative knowledge building across borders through open platforms, sharing resources, and co-creation. Educators and learners from different contexts can come together to produce knowledge that's richer, more inclusive, and more globally relevant. And more importantly, OEPs also encourage us to move beyond simply adding diverse content. It invites this critical engagement with multiple worldviews. And this is where redressing epistemic justice also comes in. This means not just acknowledging different perspectives, but actively questioning whose knowledge is centered, whose is marginalized, and how we shift those dynamics. It opens up spaces for learners to become co-creators of knowledge rather than passive recipients, and moving away from a banking approach to education. An important step in challenging dominant narratives and making the curriculum more inclusive. We also need to consider how the information is being represented. Are we using Western paradigms to present information? Is there another way? And I'll come back to this as well. So as I'm thinking about open educational practices and curriculum internationalization, decolonization is integral to this conversation. So decolonization is a process of undoing colonizing practices. Within the educational context, this means confronting and challenging the colonizing practices that have influenced education in the past and which are still present today. So decolonization in education goes beyond revising a reading list or adding diverse examples, which can also in some ways be viewed as tokenistic. It's about challenging epistemic dominance. Whose knowledge is being privileged and who is being erased or questioned? To decolonize, to intentionally internationalize the curriculum is to recenter those whose knowledge had been rendered to the margins as essential to how we understand and engage with the world. It asks us to reflect on whose voices shape our curricula and whose have been left out. This is where I think we can see the transformative potential of open educational practices with curriculum I don't know why I'm really struggling with this word today, internationalization and decolonization. Open educational practices shifts power. It empowers learners, particularly those from historically, persistently, or systemically marginalized groups, to participate in creating, sharing, and sharing knowledge. It opens up educational spaces where diverse voices and lived experiences are not only welcome, but seen as essential to the learning process. And perhaps most importantly, open educational practices foster critical reflection and dialogic learning. So it's not just about delivering content, but encouraging ongoing questions, conversations, and collective meaning making in ways that open educational practices become a pathway, a dynamic process towards a more just, inclusive, and decolonized curriculum. And in the classes I teach, I really see our students are so vocal and they really push this. So this is in incorporating these approaches, thinking about how I'm intentionally looking at it and getting the learners to help co-create this in the classes has been so important. I'm going to focus on a few kind of strategies for inclusive design, thinking about open educational practices. So the next slide I'm going to share with you has a lot of text, and I'm not going to dive into it, but I just wanted to highlight this as perhaps something you might want to look at. So this is a framework that may help with assessing and looking at how open educational practices are intertwined with culturally responsive practices. So this particular table, and I have the resource at the end as well of my presentation, is from Teaching and Learning with Open Educational Resources. This is from Achieving the Dream and SRI. They conducted a study to determine whether the use of OER leads to instructional transformation, shapes pedagogy, enables more equitable and culturally responsive teaching practices. So I just wanted to share that with you. And so what I'm going to do now is talk about different ways of looking at the transformational potential of open educational practices. So the transformational potential of open educational practices lies in its ability to dismantle barriers to learning and promote inclusive practices that can adapt to the diverse needs of learners so they feel seen and heard. Open educational practices encourages collaborative, learner-centered approaches that can significantly enhance how we are supporting inclusive, diverse, and globally relevant curricula. So I'll just talk through these different approaches. Empowerment of learners. Open educational practices shifts the power dynamics in education by giving students a voice and agency in their learning process. This empowerment can lead to increased motivation and engagements as student feels that their contributions are valued and ensure that all students can find a way to connect with the material and their peers. This includes respect for all voices and understanding that one voice and one perspective cannot define the work. Collaborative communities. By encouraging collaboration among learners, OEP fosters a sense of community and shared responsibility for learning, mutual respect for the ways knowledge is shared and what is shared. And going with this, just thinking about working in community, sometimes I think we're so focused, or this comes from me, on, okay, we have a deadline, the grant or the funding will end by this date. But I think there's so much importance in developing community and taking time to build those relationships. And also, as we think about communities, there are many ways communities share information and knowledge. Some have a very rich oral tradition. And how is that shaping our paradigms? How are stories a part of our learning and undoing of colonial structures? Stories are powerful. They allow us to connect with one another on multiple levels. They stay with us and they inspire and motivate us. This is not something a sterile traditional textbook allows for. This is the power of open educational practices that are intentional and designed, that seek to decolonize structures of knowledge dissemination and reshape how knowledge is shared and what is shared. And with that, let's turn to funds of knowledge. Returning back to my journey into the world of open educational practices, when that student uttered those words, I don't feel like I belong. And every time I say that, it still touches me. That changed my direction in so many ways. I started thinking more deeply about funds of knowledge. The idea that learners bring rich cultural experiences, insights, and ways of knowing into the classroom. I began to ask myself, whose knowledge is centered in this course? Whose stories are being told? Our learners, the community we interact with, come with diverse experiences and knowledge that when we think about decolonization and internationalization, why are we not tapping into those lived experiences? Valuing what they already know. This isn't just about making them feel included. It's about reshaping the very foundation of our courses. Next, cultivation of critical thinking and creativity. Open educational practices encourage students to engage critically with content, collaborate on problem solving, and create original works. It encourages creativity, and I've seen amazing works that learners have put together. As students design, remix, and reframe content in meaningful ways that require them to critically consider that what knowledge and perspective are being shared, who benefits and who does not. How can we move away from extractive relationships to one based on ethicality, relational learning, and respect for what knowledge is to be shared and with whom? And as I'm going through this in the chat, if you want to comment and contribute on ways that perhaps you've embedded this in your own teaching and learning, I'd love to hear about that as well. Next is real world relevance. Open educational practices has the ability to connect learners to real world issues or community needs, from theoretical understanding to practical implications, and understanding the various socio-political cultural factors that must be taken into account when solving complex real world issues. And again, this excites me about open educational practices. The ability to be truly transformative in the way that no traditional textbook can. But we need to also reimagine ways of connecting at a global level, how to build those relationships. Our socio-political cultural context is forever changing. And there comes the challenge of creating decolonized learning that is also internationalizing the curricula, and it's dynamic. And these transformative approaches may be actualized through OERs that perhaps embed stories, narratives that speak to the complexity of issues being addressed, through pedagogy, through authentic assignments that have students connect with communities in ways that are, of course, respectful and ethical, to understand local and global issues, creating cross-collaborative projects, and so on. And I hope I have time, just going to share one quick little additional story. Recently, my son and I were at an event, and they were sharing stories. It was a play, and it was sharing about immigrants' experiences. And I asked him, what did you learn? What did you take away from that? What did you think about it? And he said to me that, I'd heard about this, but I never truly understood how difficult that immigrant journey is, what their lived experiences and what their lived reality is like. And this really brought it through. And so I just want to re-emphasize the power of stories. And intertwined within these are the 5 R's of respect, reciprocity, risk, reach, and resist, as defined by Rajiv Jangiani, another Jangiani out in the OER world. Heard they've done great work. Okay, knowledge is not a means to an end. It's a relationship. It's not extractive. It takes time to build relationships and create communities. We need to make space and time for this if we really want to learn from one another. We are interconnected, and for better or worse, our actions impact others and ourselves. It affects our perspective, identity, beliefs, and hopefully brings shifts that welcome inclusive structural changes and the breaking of hegemonic norms. I want to share a few quotes with you from 2 studies that are discussed in the chapter, Creating Learning Spaces for Social Justice Projects, Applying the Values of Critical Digital Pedagogy and Open Pedagogy. And it was featured in Pedagogy Opened, Innovative Theory and Practice, which is edited by Tiffany Tajerna. So I'm going to read an excerpt to help sort of contextualize the quotes. So in this chapter, we share how a values-based framework was applied to various layers of open pedagogy work, such as creating spaces for interdisciplinary faculty, staff, and student teams, supporting faculty decision for teaching and learning, and supporting student engagement in open pedagogy. By applying this values-based framework to open pedagogy projects, Advocates for Open can widen the entrance to open education as another avenue for seeking social justice and learning spaces. One key lesson from our experiences and the narratives shared in this chapter is how a values-based framework can cut across disciplinary silos that make up our current system to support work that is interdisciplinary and directly addresses other types of power differentials. So this is a quote from a student. I think that a world view of open means experiencing and learning from various types of sources that allow students to broaden their perspectives. This project allowed me to learn and hear from others' perspective about events that were occurring or had occurred in the world. This allowed me to develop a better understanding of what was going on in the world and how it was impacting people. Quote from my faculty, they are accessible in that they provide a space and place for educators to go to and engage with community of open authors, resources, materials, and institutions that may not be easily available if not due to open. So I think these 2 really exemplify what we've been talking about. One, understanding another's lived reality and crossing those borders. And that's where that Western paradigm comes in. I think sometimes It's so hard to break free from a paradigm that's embedded within our systems, that through open and sharing of resources and stories and understandings, we're hopefully able to break those paradigms, break those structures that this is the way we share academic knowledge, right? If it's not situated in a Western paradigm, there are other ways. And so this is what I really love about these quotes here. And I want to share two more quotes. This is by faculty. By collecting the interviews on public websites, students created an alternative textbook to contemporary history. This exercise helps them to deconstruct the textbooks of their past by seeing all the small changes and events that were left out of their past history text. It thus asks them to reimagine or re-envision the ways in which the educational system has prioritized the memorization of facts over other more nuanced historical analysis. And this quote is from a student. By choosing to make my oral history project public for anyone to see, it gives people an opportunity to learn about eras of history or topics from different, more personal, emotional perspectives, unlike what one might find in a textbook. Again, it's highlighting the stories of connecting on another level, those sensory levels, emotions. It brings back that human-centeredness. It's addressing epistemic injustice by what has been left out, and all those at the margins, which, as I do more work in this area, I realize how those spaces get erased within a blink of an eye. And so this really stresses the importance of that work and connecting with each other. And I think at our time within the current political and geopolitical context, we need that humanness, that human-centeredness in our work. As I wrap up, I want to share a quote by Octavia Butler, who through her writing challenged gender stereotypes in American fiction, white privilege in their narratives, and racism in her profession. And I came across this quote recently, so I want to share it with you. All that you change, all that you touch, you change. All that you change changes you. The only lasting truth is change. And what I liked about this is it stresses change, it's relational and dynamic. That nothing is static. There's always that dynamic aspect to it. It highlights agency. We are always shaping and being shaped by the world. And when we're thinking about decolonization or curriculum internationalization, it's a reminder that when we engage in transformative practice, such as open educational practices, we are not just changing curricula. It has a wider impact that ripples beyond the classroom. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarita. That was very insightful. And yes, when change happens, yeah, it doesn't only change things around us, but yeah, it has a far-lasting impact, especially when we know who's involved in the change and who's it impacting and whose voices are heard. Thank you very much. I like how you weaved a very interesting aspects from the learning and teaching, looking into the students' agency, inclusion and collaboration and building knowledge to what really matters here and highlighting the social justice aspect. So thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. There's a lot of important things in the slides that I personally would like to get back to. Particularly that table, to look into it into much more depth, and the research from Mahan, Rajiv, and Catherine. These are actually good references to look into, and I encourage everyone here to review them. Now, it's time now for thanking you again, Sarita, and opening it to our audience. I've got a lovely audience joining us today, and I would like to invite you to put questions in the chat, or if you like to unmute and ask questions, feel free to do so.
I'd love to ask you a question if there are no questions. Can ask the audience a question.
Let's just start with that. Well, questions do you have for us, Sarita?
Sure. So I'm curious, I'd love to hear what are ways that you've, if you're teaching, or what practices do you have if you're focused on design, to help get students voices at decolonizing. I think this is something sometimes, when I started my journey, it was, okay, how are we decolonizing the syllabus and diverse readings? And I think sometimes it's, as I went through that path, I learned a lot myself, and I'm curious, either what have you learned along that journey, or what have you changed? What practices have you embedded?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I know we've got many people in the audience who helped or produced some of the open textbooks, looking into highlighting the Indigenous knowledge, Australian Indigenous knowledge in some of the textbooks. Anyone would like to talk to that? Any exam doesn't have to be open textbooks. I'm sure there are plenty. I've got audience from other Australian universities. So
Or even if Shaheen posted, oh, go ahead, David, sorry.
Sorry, no, I was going to say Amaze might be being a little humble here and not answering your question herself with her own practices. So Maze, I think you could talk about a reusable assessment with students in this context as well.
yeah,
some of the work you've done in that.
Thanks, David. Around what you mentioned earlier, Sarita, and I'll give another example. I know we have another good example, which I'll talk about it after this. In terms of involving students in the co-creation of knowledge, there was a work around renewable assessment where we invite students to pre-develop some of the content that we have in a computer science degree. So that was like a bit of my experience there, where I engaged students in building open educational resources, but instead of having a general focus, the focus was actually building the contents and the topics of their own material, and bringing all the aspects that they think they would like to focus on in the curriculum, and bring or in that topic particularly. So we covered 3 areas, one of them data mining, statistical analysis, and another general topic, introduction to IT. Students were involved in building their assessments, covering those topics within these 3 subjects. So this is one example that kind of involves students, as you're saying, Sarita, students' agency and co-creation, and giving students a voice, allowing them to tell their own stories, or not necessarily only that, but also their own way of presenting the content and sharing it with their students. So that was a bit of work that I've done in the past. And another example I would like to highlight around adopting and adapting open textbooks. We have an example from the Faculty of Business. And I'm sure we've got people in the audience who've done something similar, where Associate Professor Amanda White, she decided to go ahead and adapt an OpenStax book in accounting. So this is in accounting area, and of course, OpenStax comes from American perspective, and weaving the Indigenous voice into the Australian Indigenous voice into the examples, the case studies that she put into the book was very interesting, and it's one of the good examples that I've seen here in Australia. So yeah, here is another example that we've seen from the Faculty of Business. I can give more examples. I'd like to give opportunity to others if someone would like to share something. Got something in the chat. Let's see. There's an interesting comment in the chat about belonging. I'm not sure what was your name. You've got only your maybe staff ID there, stating that I like the point you made, Sarita, regarding belonging being much more than inclusion. I think these two have been twined and are now a bit stuck, but nonetheless relevant.
Nice, that was me, Deborah.
Oh,
Sorry.
Deborah.
It's staying very quiet because I've got a big mess behind me. But I thought that was a really interesting point because there's a very strong narrative about inclusion and belonging, being together, which sort of can be enacted through designing activities in the classroom and so on, or tutorials, but doesn't really get down to an epistemological level of the knowledge that's being, you know, kind of distributed, if you like, through engagement and inclusion. So I think that's a much deeper and more difficult kind of level to reach. And we have a government that's making the most appalling announcements this morning about international students and, you know, all sorts of things. That has a knock-on effect as well to all students, which I think is incredibly unhelpful. So there's a lot going on in Australian higher education at the moment that makes those epistemological changes, I think, quite difficult. But anyway, I really enjoyed your talk, and I'll be quiet now.
Oh, I love your points. Thank you for sharing, Deborah. And we have also in Canada, with international students, we've had, you know, limits on the numbers we can take, so that's really impacted it. And then with everything that's happening in a country that we're connected with, in Canada, it's also changed the discussion, and it's interesting you bring it up. And I think some of it's shifted now in a way to belonging, but it's almost this it's almost like weaponized it in an interesting sense, like to move away from DEI. So you're right. It's a deeper, more nuanced conversation to dive into, about the differences and also the ways that sometimes also gets weaponized in different ways. Anyways, it's an interesting time we're in. I don't know how else to phrase it.
It is certainly a challenging time. One of the interesting things that I also come across, which is really related to how we moved to after COVID to online learning, and how that sense of belonging started to be acknowledged by students, saying that, particularly in Australia, that it is not there. I don't feel connected to the curriculum because of that. And there was actually a survey results published 2022 by national by quality indicator, I think, learning and teaching. I'm not sure what's the I, but it's that looks into the student experience, particularly around less than half of undergrad, and so around like a 46 something percent, and postgrad as well, acknowledging that lack of sense of belonging. Now, the response to this is not go back to face-to-face. It doesn't work that way, but where do we see the role of open education in this? How, and a lot of insights that you mentioned, Sarita, but on that particular sense of belonging because of the impact of moving to online learning, how can we bring open education practices forward and say, here is an opportunity to look into these resources and reflect more of the diverse group cohorts that we have in our classrooms through that. So that was like also alarming. That was 2022 report. I'll put it in the chat now. But that was also another interesting aspect, that lack of sense of belonging there.
I felt like we did some good things as well when we were online, and then for us, we went back and I thought we lost some of, like, I thought we spent so much time in some ways, in some courses, really connecting with students, like that creating community, you know, spending so much time just checking in, how are you doing, and just different ways of connecting with students I don't think I've seen previously. And then I don't know what happened. When over here, when we went back, I thought we lost some of those practices as well. And then for myself, I think I'm someone who is often like, okay, what do I need to get done? How can I get done? But I take much more time to really get to know who's in my classes when I'm teaching now. Like I think when I have my first class, when I'm doing a graduate seminar, it's 3 hours. It's probably spend most of that just connecting, and because I really want to know who's in the class, but making sure I keep that thread throughout. And then, like I said, that comment just changed me when a student said, I don't feel like I belong. But it then, okay, like what else are we doing? How else are they being reflected in what we do in the curricula and the course and other ways? It's leads to a lot of reflection there. But I really like what open educational practices affords us as I learn more and continue on this journey.
Yep. Nice. I don't think we responded to Shaheen's question. Sorry, Shaheen, we skipped that. But Shaheen, I'll read that. I think Western ways of thinking are so ingrained in our thinking. How did you personally decolonize your own thinking? I'm personally so much more conscious of my thinking these days that I don't fall back into regular patterns.
And it's ongoing. I don't think I've reached a point, but I think I question more kind of the way we're doing things and why we do them. So I'm working on a project where we're just looking at creating different open educational resources and really trying to get different perspectives and that those diverse perspectives and into it. And then I was thinking, why am I thinking that the resource needs to look a particular way, right? It's so intertwined, and really even just challenging, like, why do we have textbooks the way that we do? And what are other ways? And so for me, it's constantly questioning assumptions, but it's so hard that's why I think community is so important, because it's bouncing it off. And sometimes they'll say, well, why are you doing that? That we don't think, because we're so intertwined. So for me, part of it is working with and collaborating with others and working in community to question it, because it's so ingrained. I find it's a challenge to sometimes separate and see what's right in front of you. I hope that makes sense. But for me, those are some of the things. Just really questioning, why do we always do things this way? Why do we write articles the way we do, and why do we value that perspective? And sometimes we devalue an article if it's from another part of the world, from the global south. But why is our system like that? It's just as valuable. So just what are different ways, I think, and starting to break that. I hope that helps a bit. I don't have a one kind of finite way of doing it, but I find questioning and working in collaboration and community is really helpful with that.
Thank you. Yeah, that critical thinking and keep thinking about what we're doing, and as you said, how we do things and why we're doing them is very important. Going through the chat now, Ash, I love the way finding power of this quote from Sarita. What does it mean to belong? What do we mean by inclusion, and for whom? This is helpful and simple core concept to return to when we sometimes feel lost in the weeds of this complex work. Yep. Nice one, Ash. Jenny, I don't know, sorry, Sarita, if you'd like to comment.
Yeah, no, sometimes I think returning back to those core questions, Ash, is so important. As I'm going through this, sometimes you're right, we get stuck, got lost in the weeds. And then coming back, and I think that question, I think it was around COVID, before we're forced online over here. I was just starting to think about all the different lived realities of our students. And then maybe I think I'm doing something, but is that maybe causing harm? Like, what does belonging mean and look like? And there's so many factors, and how important it is to have that dialogue with our learners. So that's kind of where that came from.
We also have a question from Jenny. Jenny, would you like to read that?
Hi, yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
You asked Sarita about like practices that we use to try and decolonize our practices and the resources, and I was really trying to reflect on what I do because I teach academic skills with mostly international students, and I'm essentially teaching English. And in my experience, the vast majority of open educational resources are in English. Maybe I'm actually wrong about that. How do we kind of get over this dominance of English language? Because it seems to me often that open education is kind of reinforcing that. Like how do we decolonize when so much of what we're producing is in English?
That is an excellent question, Jenny. And I think I was reading a stat, I think echoing your sentiments about the amount of resources. And maybe it's, I don't know if I have one kind of wow answer for that. I'm thinking through this as you're asking, as it's come up a few times as well. One is how are we, what's out there? So I was thinking of that as I'm working on a project, and I was thinking, English is the language that, but then that these resources are being created, and then I started to think about, well, maybe you already have resources. Maybe we should look at maybe translating what's there, like understanding the resources that are there already, right? Like unless it's in English, we haven't looked. Like, did I even ask the question or say, hey, what resources do you have? Like maybe and being explicit. Are they in another language? I was actually looking at a website that was focused explicitly on that. OER resources in other languages as a site for learners who may be looking for them. So just what is already out there? How are we also facilitating and working at, hey, we're working on this collaboratively. What supports maybe are needed to make sure these can also be in another language? Like what supports are there, and that it's got that multiple perspective. It's not that hegemonic English language way of looking at it. So I hope that helped, but I think, and then I was just thinking a lot of learners I'm seeing are using, like whether it's Gen AI or other things, to translate while I'm talking, right? So I think it gets to the point that it's so helpful. And if we're traveling somewhere, we might use something similar. So how are we cross-collaborating in looking at language and resources in different language? Because the meanings are different too, right? Sometimes I listen to things in like Hindi or Punjabi, and I struggle to translate it because I can't find the right words, right? It's just a metaphor doesn't translate. Similarly, how are we helping facilitate that when we're working on projects? How are we looking at explaining metaphors that are from another culture and translating that? I don't know if I've helped. I feel like I've gone a little off tangent, but I love the question, and maybe it's part of decolonizing academic English ease as well. Why do we want things in a particular way? I hope that's somewhat helpful. Apologies if I went off tangent.
Oh, can I make a comment on that as well? Because I work almost exclusively with students from diverse language groups and so on. And that is a tension. So we live in a monolingual, multicultural country that doesn't value first language. So, I mean, that's part of it. And then as you referred to, the hegemony of English and so on, it's absolutely true. It sort of scythes off a whole tranche of research that we feel we can't access except through AI, which maybe, one of the best things about AI is that you can translate. But, and English has been sold as the international language. It's the sort of lingua franca of the world now rather than French or Latin. So it's pretty hard to bust that. And I try with my students to just allow them to have discussions, or to, if there's a definition that's difficult, I let them use their first language, because what's the point of hammering on about something that nobody gets and not valuing that, the intelligence and the linguistic skills in a language other than English. So yeah, just it's more a comment than a question. Sorry, Sarita.
No, I love that. And I love it. And sometimes there's a nuance that is explained better in a different language than trying to work through it. You know, I was at an airport and I met some students and we got on and then I started talking about open educational resources and they're like, oh, this is great because I can translate and better understand it. Like, that's great. And I love all the resources. There's one I found and it was all in it's based in India and different ones. I don't have it on me, it's my laptop, otherwise I'd share that one as well. But I love this rich list that's here. Okay, I'm trying to go back to some of the questions, or see if there's other questions.
I think there's one more question we haven't addressed from Anjana. Anjana, are you available to, do you want to read your question? Go for it.
Hey, thank you for your super important presentations, Rita. My question was, so we cannot disconnect from the world and current events around us, and it's critical for us as people and as universities and institutions who champion social justice to make conscious efforts to help make the world a better place through our work. So with how tumultuous the world has been in the past few years, and especially this past year, do you have any tips for what we can prioritize for being more ethical with the learning content we co-create?
Oh, that's a really good question. I feel like I want to say to continue to take risks. I'm thinking of the 5 R's. To take the risks and to resist, I want to say. I feel we're in this tense geopolitical time where we're being silenced in one way or another. And I love the open community for that social justice, for pushing the boundaries and to continue that, to take that. Like, I just think it's so important right now. Yeah, it's just so many conversations I'm in and what's at the margins. It's this, oh, that's really happening. You know, so much is either denial, misinformation, lies, and it's just, some of it's just being erased. Like what we found one day, pages are gone on the website, right? I think our open educational practices are so important, more so now than ever, to continue to push those boundaries, to get those voices, narratives, and global understandings of what's happening in different parts of the world.
Yep, that is a good call for adopting more open education practices, opening our eyes and making us a little bit more critical. David, you've got your hands up.
Yeah, I know we're totally out of time, but I just wanted to thank you so much, Sarita, for bringing Octavia Butler into your talk today as well, because I recommend everybody read Octavia Butler if you are interested in the 5 R's as well.
Thank you, David.
Thank you so much.
That's fantastic. All right, so in the last minute, allow me to thank Sarita for the insights and the wonderful session today, and the audience also for your engagement, and the team for your support. Thank you, Jenny, David, Helen, and Scott for facilitating in the background, and to our community for engaging with us today. We have more sessions to come. We've got a link in the chat. David has just put it there. I look forward to seeing you more, and we've got also a feedback form if you like to send us some feedback. We'd appreciate that. Let us know if you have any questions. Get in touch. We'll publish the recording along with a blog to highlight this fantastic session. Thanks again, Sarita. And I hope to see you another time.
Thank you so much. It was an honor and joy to be here tonight and to talk and have these discussions with everyone.
Fantastic. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of Open Education Week, everyone.